in Harris Park. And one day, a number of years ago, the stove just gave out, as in started smoking, as in possible small fire, as in was no longer going to work, kind of giving out. And as a result, we needed to figure out what to do. Now, we wanted to change the kitchen. We've always had an idea of changing this kitchen, and so Liz looked into it, and she looked on Gumtree, and she found this amazing kitchen. I am talking stone-top benches, beautiful finishes, automatically closing doors, and it was all really cheap, and we were so excited about it. So we went to this kitchen, we went and saw the kitchen, and suddenly it kind of dawned on us that it was an amazing kitchen, but that room was different than our room. For that amazing kitchen with all the finishes was designed and created for that specific room. And what we wanted to do is we wanted to just lift out the kitchen and plonk it into our kitchen. But as we did the measurements, we started talking, and we started talking, and we started talking. And we talked about the possibility of taking down walls. And we talked about the possibility of reconfiguring our kitchen and sawing through the stone benches and installing gas. And we finally came to the conclusion that it just wasn't going to work out. We couldn't just lift the kitchen from another room and plonk it into our room because they were different rooms. And that would not be the best thing for that kitchen, so we weren't able to buy it. We got a new stove. Unfortunately, the lift and the plonk rarely works. There was a judge, Roy S. Moore, in 2003, Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Alabama. He lost office as a result of legal action. What he did wrong is that he inserted a granite block weighing more than 2 tons in the rotunda of the judicial building. On the block was inscribed, among other things, parts of the 10 Commandments. He campaigned for office in 2000 with the slogan, "The 10 Commandments Judge." Now, this is an interesting story for a couple of reasons. A, that's a really weird motto to be beneficial and helpful for you, hence America. But another thing is, what he was trying to do is take the 10 Commandments, lift it out of its context, take it away from the preamble, take it away from who it was actually addressed to, and then plonking it in the middle of the modern day justice system. Well, that didn't work, and he lost his role as a result. For the lift and the plonk, it's not the best way to understand the Bible. The lift and the plonk is not the best way to understand the 10 Commandments. Another example of this is just this week that a Texas Senate passed a bill that would require the 10 Commandments to be prominently displayed in public school classrooms. Now, would it be good if American school children knew the 10 Commandments? Yes, it would be great. That's a positive thing, especially if they were to obey it. But the 10 Commandments, taken outside of the context in which they were given, outside of a relationship with God, is not going to draw people to Christianity. And one of the things we talk about consistently in this church is that if a person comes into our midst with a large sin, our biggest issue with that person is not the sin that they may have. Their biggest need is not to be told that their life is wrong. No, their biggest need is Jesus. They need Jesus first, and everything else will flow out of that. But they need Jesus more than they need the law, for the law is a response out of a relationship with Jesus. When we lift the 10 Commandments out of its original context, out of a relationship with God, and plonk them in the modern world, it does not work. And so that's what we're looking at today. In Deuteronomy 5, we get the 10 Commandments from the Old Testament. They are delivered in a certain way. They are delivered with a necessary preamble. They are delivered with a context that must be understood. And the 10 Commandments should never be separated or divorced from it. We're in our middle of our series in Deuteronomy. We get to chapter 5, the 10 Commandments. And it raises a number of questions. For why are the 10 Commandments that were originally stated in Exodus 20, why are they repeated here? What are they intended to do? What do the 10 Commandments actually mean? And of course, this all points to the bigger question of how we understand them in a modern society. Well, context. This is the start of Moses' second discourse, the central section of the whole book. subdivided into two main parts, chapters 5 to 11 and then chapters 12 to 26. The first part, chapters 5 to 11, is all about an encouragement to covenant loyalty and obedience, kind of flowing out what Mel was talking about last week in chapter 4. And then chapter 12 to 26 is a lot more detailed legislation, much of which renews and expands on the Ten Commandments, already given in a form in Exodus 21 to 23. So with this chapter, we get in the middle of chapter 5, at the beginning of chapter 5 to 11, which is the first half of this second sermon, and it's a lot more encouragement and pastorally based. Now, to do the Ten Commandments justice, we really need its own series, okay? And I do not have the time or space today to go into the details of each of the Ten Commandments. So what I want to do this morning is instead, I want to look at them as a unit, as a block, as a whole. And addressing some of the things about how they were given and how we need to understand the Ten Commandments as a block. Okay, so in chapter 5, verse 1 to 5, we get an immediate context for how the Ten Commandments were delivered. And before the Ten Commandments are given, there's three things worth noting. The first one is found in verse 2 to 3. The Lord our God made a covenant with us at Horeb. It was not with our fathers that the Lord made this covenant, but with us, with all of us who are alive here today. Now, Horeb is referring to Mount Sinai. So Moses is saying that God made the Mount Sinai covenant with all of you. The problem is, he didn't. Because the people who Moses is talking to were not the same people at Mount Sinai. The people at Mount Sinai were the people in the current audience, their parents. Their parents who did not believe that God could take and lead them into Canaan the first time. Their parents who had died through the 40 years of wandering in the desert. So Moses here is rather saying it is as if he had given it to you. Now when he says fathers, he's not referring to the patriarchs like Abraham and Noah. He's instead referring to the biological parents of the people he's talking to. But in saying this, what his meaning is, this counts for you guys. One of the themes that we've talked about in Deuteronomy is that Moses wants to renew the covenant. Wants to say that covenant that you had in Sinai, where God will be good to you if you're faithful to him, well, that counts now. And this is kind of in Deuteronomy a renewal of that covenant that we see in Exodus 20 and beyond. Okay, and so what Moses is preaching at Moab is very similar to what was preached in Mount Sinai. This is not a replacement of the Ten Commandments, but rather a reinforcement of that covenant as Israel is about to head into a new era into the Promised Land and crossing the Jordan. So continuity of the covenant. Now the second thing worth noting is the personal nature of this covenant. Verse 4, the Lord spoke to you face to face out of the fire on the mountain. At that time I stood between the Lord and you to declare to you the word of the Lord, because you were afraid of the fire and did not go up to the mountain. So much in this. The Lord spoke to you face to face. Now this should be understood metaphorically because Israel didn't want to go up to the mountain when God was appearing. There was thunderbolts and lightning, very, very frightening. The earth was shaking. So Israel's like, no, we're scared. We don't want to go up there. You go up there and you talk to God. And that's exactly what happened. So the Ten Commandments are not some abstract duty in relation to an impersonal, universal principle, as they are often used. But rather, the Ten Commandments are a personal response required by a personal God. It is personal. It is the response to the law, the response to the commands are based on the relationship that the people have with their God. And they can't be removed or separated from that. If you don't have a relationship with God, the Ten Commandments means nothing to you. They are not meant to, because they're not meant for you. They are meant as a response to your relationship with God. It's like in Psalms 119, when the author revels in the delight of the law, that he does so out of an overflow of their joy in their personal relationship with Yahweh, the lawgiver. Who God is, and who God is to us, is critical in our understanding and how we look at the Ten Commandments. Often the Ten Commandments are used as a big stick, right? Do this, don't do this. But that is to divorce them from the personal relationship with God. They are a response. God has done so much for us, and therefore we obey the Ten Commandments as a response of who God is to us. It is personal. And that leads to the third point here, verse 6. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. Here we have the foundation of the law. Here we have the motivation of why we should obey the law, because of what God did for us. Often when we think of the Old Testament, we think of the law as the way that the people were saved. But rather, this preamble points to the fact that rather, the Ten Commandments are a response by the fact that they have already been saved. They were taken out of slavery. The bondage of slavery was broken by God, and their response to that salvific act by God is to obey the Ten Commandments. Their obedience is not in order to be saved, it is because they are saved. And it's just like us. Here in the New Testament, we are to obey God, yes, but based on what Jesus has done for us, on the fact that we are saved, on the fact that we are different. And the same thing was true in the Old Testament. Israel is to obey God as a response to what God has done for them. We see this again in Exodus, in verse 19. In Exodus, before you get to the law, you have 19 chapters of salvation. The pivotal text, Exodus 19, 3-6, makes the same important point. You have seen what I have done. We obey only because of what God has previously done for us. And that is a response. And so therefore, again, it doesn't make much sense to enforce the Ten Commandments on a group of people who have no relationship with God, who have not been saved, for they are asking to respond to something that has not yet occurred in their lives. The Ten Commandments is a response. The Ten Commandments is personal. Another thing I think that is helpful to look at in terms of the Ten Commandments is that it was kind of setting up a nation. Verse 6, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, the land of slavery. But that's exactly what had happened. Israel had entered Egypt a family. They were leaving it a nation. They only way of living and governing and control and authority, the only culture they had ever known was in Egypt. But they are not Egyptian, they are Israel. They are God's people. And so now as they have escaped the culture of Egypt, the Ten Commandments is basically one way where God says, okay, now this is how you're going to live. That's how you used to live, but that is not a helpful way to live. That is not a God-honouring way to live. That is not going to be an effective way for you to live. So the Ten Commandments in one sense is like a constitution or a Bill of Rights. It is declaring how Israel will be a nation, what they will do, what is important to them, how they will live, what will they value. And as a result, what we can see is you can actually read the Ten Commandments in light of Egypt. Okay, well, let's take the first commandment. In Egypt, Pharaoh claims that he was a god and refuses to recognize Yahweh as God, particularly in Egypt. Then the first commandment, that you shall have no other gods but me, flows out of a context of a rule from another god. For in Egypt, they were ruled by a god. And now God is saying, no other gods but me and me alone. There are no pharaohs, there are no other gods, it is only Yahweh. The second does the same thing, with no other idols. Here it's about preventing the temptation to worship idols like what was happening in Egypt. See, you can see how the Ten Commandments relate to the context out of which they came. In Egypt, the family life was destroyed. Now life is to be structured around the networks of viable extended family households with internal authority and sexual integrity were protected by the 5th and 7th commandments. In Egypt, they were ruled over by murderous tyranny. Now they were to protect human life and all unlawful killing, as we see in the 6th commandment. And so on and so forth. You can do this with basically every commandment, looking at how it has come out of the context of Egypt. Time and time again, we see through the commandments, through Deuteronomy, this is where you came from, don't go back to that. the Ten Commandments are the way that God is instituting his people to live differently for him as a result of where they have come. All right, then we get to the actual Ten Commandments. And it's worth noting it's a game of two halves. If you look at the Ten Commandments, there's basically Commandment 1 to 4 is all about the vertical relationship with God. You and God. And then Commandments 5 to 10 are all about the horizontal relationship of us with each other. And this idea of a game of two halves can be seen in how Jesus summarizes the Ten Commandments in Matthew 22, 37 to 38. Jesus replied, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment, and the second is like it. Love your neighbour as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments." Now, love the Lord your God with all your heart, vertical. Commandment 1 to 4. Love your neighbour as yourself, horizontal. Commandment 5 to 10. And in this way, what Jesus is saying is he's giving a summary of a summary. For he is summarising the Ten Commandments, and the Ten Commandments are summarising the rest of the law, which we see expanded on in Deuteronomy chapters 12 to 20, whatever it is. I forget off the top of my head. The next thing when you're looking at the Ten Commandments is it's worth noting the sequence. Each commandment is there in a particular order. These are ranked. These are priority. They're intentional, the order in which they are given. For the first is the most important commandment. No other gods but me. God comes first. He is to be worshipped exclusively, without images, without abuse of his names. And then, after that, is the health and the benefit of society as a whole, particularly in relation to workers, as seen in the Sabbath. And then we see in Commandment 5, the central importance of family. And then Commandment 7 protects sexual integrity. After the family, the focus is individual life. And so if you look in a broad scheme about the priorities of how God has ranked his commandments, you have, if we can go to the next slide, I think, we can come back to that after. Yeah, you have God, society, family, individual. This is how God views the world. This is how God views what is important. That we would look after God, society, family, individual. But in our society, what we have actually done is we have inversed this. That is not our values. That is not our priorities. What we have actually done is we've put individual, family, society, and God. Let's look at one of the ways that we have done that. Where our world says, where is a birthright to desire a better house and a better car and a better life. Our word is less tangible or necessary. Broken promises litter our past with uncomfortable ease. Life is important, but abortion is okay. Monogamy is scoffed. Polygamy is coming back into fashion. Parental respect is neutered, with Christmas and Easter gatherings being enough to tick that box. Sundays reflect every other day because, hey, double pay. And God as a swear name pervades many movies and a lot of pop songs. And don't even get started on only worshipping God alone. In our modern society, we have idols. We don't use the name idols, but we definitely have idols like career and success and sex and money. See, our world has inverted the priorities that God has placed and that God has said, that God has stated. That we should have the priority of God, society, family, and then me. And that goes countercultural to our culture. Countercultural to the people around us. What? I'm less worried about my individual rights, about my successes, about my assets. And in a God-shaped view, yes. God comes first. Others come first. You come last. If we lived in a society that actually lived like this, we would all be better off. We would all be more godly. We would all be in a much better place. Alas, that is not the way it works. We have reversed God's design for human life. And there's a temptation for us to do so, even as Christians. If you were to order these in relation to your priorities, how would you order them? Would they line up with the way that God has ordered them? or would they look a little bit different? All right, now we get to the actual commandments. Now, like I said, we're not going to go through all of them, but what I wanted to do is, if the commandments are ranked, then I want to look really briefly at the top 4, right? And see if we can get a little bit more depth into these. The first commandment is, you shall have no other gods before me. Now, literally it is, there shall not be for you other gods before or over against my face. That's what it literally means. Before or over against my face. Face. Where have we heard face before? Well, verse 4, the Lord spoke to you face to face. The idea here is there is an image. There is God and there is you, and you are to have nothing in the middle. No other gods, idols, otherwise should stand between the relationship between you and God. And this kind of makes a lot of sense in one sense in terms of marriage. When we get married, what we are saying, there will be me and there will be my wife, and there will be no other person in the middle. Not my parents, not another man, not another woman, me and my wife. And that is a godly biblical understanding of marriage. And this is what God is saying in a similar way. There is you, there is me, there is no one else. No one obscuring, no other obstacles, no one between us. It's just you and me, face to face. No other gods but me. And the way that this is put has a flavour of jealousy and wrath, if there is. See, God is a jealous God. God doesn't want us to have little gods on the side. God doesn't want us to have anything between him and us, and justifiably so. I don't want Liz to have a boyfriend on the side. I would be jealous and wrathful if that did occur. I would be angry, and rightfully so. And same thing with God. If we do put another God in between him and us, he will be jealous. He will be angry. And there will be consequences of that. See, no other God can hold a candle in your life to what God has done for you. For who God is to you. We try and do so unsuccessfully all the time. We put little g gods in the place where only a big G God can be. Where only a big G God can satisfy, and we think it will go well, and it never does. For a little g God can never satisfy, only the big G God can. No other gods but me. Oh, that we would understand God more. For if we truly understand who he is and what he has done, we would never be tempted to try and come up with our own little g God. The next commandment flows from this. Don't have any idols. Don't have a God. Don't make a God, particularly when the Creator is incomparable to the creation. And Romans touches on this as well. The text gives its own motivation for obedience on this through the character of God. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God. Having committed, God commits himself exclusively to his people, and he asks his people to commit themselves exclusively to God as a result. And all other substitutes are puny. The third commandment, do not misuse the name of the Lord your God. You shall not treat the name of Yahweh as worthless. The knowledge of the personal name of God, Yahweh, was arguably the greatest gift God ever gave Israel. And so the commandment is, don't use it in vain. Don't treat it like trash. And there is a real link here between this commandment and commandment 9, where in the court system, people would swear in the name of Yahweh in judicial proceedings. And we still do it. Often we swear that we would tell the truth, the whole truth, and we do so in the Bible. Why do we do that if you don't have a relationship with God? Because it means nothing to you. But the concept is that we would never blaspheme the name of God, and so therefore we would never lie. The judicial system would work a lot more successfully if people were not to blaspheme God's name and swear an oath and then break it the next day by trying to get ill-gotten gains in court. In a modern age, perjury is committed regularly and God's name is trivialised. OMG is a popular culture saying. But I think part of it is, we are not to use God's name in that way. I really like Taylor Swift. I have a soft spot for the singer, but I can't sing Shake It Off without changing the lyrics because I think that's related to this. All right, then the fourth commandment, observe the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. Holy means set apart, it being a day like no other. Two reasons for this. One, when you're working the whole time, when you have no days off, then there is an increased temptation for work to be an idol. For work to be your all, your everything, for you to have nothing else but work, and work being the centre and core of your life. A rest day breaks that up, breaks that cycle, and allows you to have the option of not having it as everything, as not having it as this core centre. And then another aspect of this is back in Egypt. They had no rest days. They had to work every single day. And so just as that was not a good idea, God here is saying, you don't do that either. You don't exploit your workers. You give them rest. You give them a day. You give them a time where they don't have to work just for you. Okay. Harold Macmillan, the British Prime Minister from 1957 to 63, described the Sabbath as the first and greatest worker protection act in history, preserving social liberation. And so it shows who God is and that God loves everyone. And also shows that social justice is important, which is another big theme of Deuteronomy. Okay, what do we do with all this? I think when we read the Ten Commandments, we play a volume game, where we turn up the volume on the commandments that we're comfortable with. Yeah? Do not have any other gods but me. Happy with that one. Yeah? Do not... make sure you keep the Sabbath holy. Yep, I can handle that. But then we turn it down when there are things that we don't like to hear. Like, do not steal. Like, do not make any idols. Like, do not covet. Do not be jealous. Do not want something that you do not have. We play the volume game. And we go, yeah, happy with that. Oh, shush, God. No. Just, no, I don't like that one so much. Or that we then try and come up with an understanding of that law or command that makes it okay, where we neuter and take out the teeth of the commandment and say, well, I'm not doing it in this way, so tick. We can be very selective in how we obey the commandments and how we understand the commandments. But a biblical understanding may lead us to changing our life. A biblical understanding may lead us to changing our action, and maybe what God is calling us to do. Last point that I would like to make is verse 29. Oh, that their hearts would be inclined to fear me and keep all my commands, always, so that it might go well with them and their children forever. God speaks to the nation out of the fire and the cloud and the deep darkness at Mount Sinai. Israel's response is, we shouldn't be here, we're going to die. You go, Moses, you go up the mountain. And God is going, good, fantastic, you get it. You are fearing me, and you should fear me. And that's really good. If only that would continue. If only that would be the case for the rest of your life. But then it doesn't even last 40 days for Israel until there is a golden calf, and God is thinking about destroying them all. Like, I know what you're going to do. I know that right now you're in a good place. Oh, that their hearts would be inclined to fear me forever. Oh, that they would keep these commandments forever. Oh, people of God, just keep doing what you know you should be doing. It's not how we start the race of Christianity, it is how we finish it. One of the things that has broken my heart many times in youth ministry is that I've seen these guys convert, and I've seen them grasp God, and I've seen them love God, and I've been in camps where I've just, yes, the Holy Spirit's doing something, and then 5 years later I don't see them anymore. And they're out of church, living for themselves, living for the world. They had such a great start. Oh, if only they would continue. I think I preached on Revelations chapter 2 to 3 in a camp that I did recently, and one of the things that comes up is, oh, you have forgotten your first love. Yeah? And I think that can be the case for us. We've started well, and we started with intent, and we went a little bit more hardcore, but it's harder now. And the temptation of our world is too great. And I'm really tired. And I really don't want to have to continue to obey God in the way that I used to obey God. And I think this speaks to that, where God is saying, oh, if only they would continue. If only we would continue to respond to God. Oh, if only we would continue to obey the Ten Commandments like maybe we previously had, or maybe God is calling us to. Oh, if only. Please, would we pray. Dear Lord, we praise you for your Ten Commandments. We praise you for your word. We praise you for what you have done for us. We praise you that you have saved us, that we are different, that we are forgiven, that we are righteous in your eyes as a result of Christ. We praise you, Lord, that we are not what we once were, that we are not bound by the sinful ways, that we are not in the same situation. And we praise you, Lord, for what your Spirit may have taken us out of it. Now I ask you, Lord, that you would take us into an active obedience to your word, into a response to the Ten Commandments. Based on the personal relationship that we have with you, please, Lord, help us to respond to what you have commanded us to do, to how you have commanded us to live. Give us a proper understanding of these laws. Give us a proper application of what that looks like in modern day life. And help us, Lord, to continue in it. To not go hard and then soft, that we would continue to persevere in faith in you. That we would have a life that is identified by our obedience to you. Not just for a time of our life, but for the entire thing. Lord, draw us to you. Draw us to obedience, we ask. In your name, amen. If I can ask the music team to come and lead us in the